I'm Gabe.
And I'm Kat.
And we're
the Ghouls Next Door.
Yeah. So we're starting a new series.
Yeah.
We have finished with the end of the world. We're done with it. We just want to live in this world.
Yeah.
Just figure it out. I guess.
Yep.
Yeah. So cheery today, Kat. This time we're going to do a series covering representation in horror. We've talked and touched on it previously with episodes like African Americans in horror film and women in horror film previously. I think that was it, right? Those are two general topics that we've covered in representation.
I was there, and we talked about stuff.
Yeah.
And we had guests, and that was the exciting part.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just the thing, right? So we are not authorities on these subjects. We might have some experiences or similar experiences, but not a full understanding of what these worlds are. So instead of us just, pretending that we're all knowledgeable and talking about things that we shouldn't be talking about, we're going to invite people on all throughout this series to help us discuss these important topics and how they're being represented in horror and what it means to them. So today we're joined by a good friend of mine, Leah Vandertak.
Hello, how is everybody?
Hi. Yeah,
You have such a cool name.
It's one, one of those, 3-letter, 4-word.
Yeah. It's very unique. Thank you so much for coming and being in our podcast lair and being a guest and helping us talk about things.
Thank you for having me. It's nice and, homey down here with all the creepy stuff on the wall. Yep.
Yeah.
Have you met our doll children?
Yeah, our happy doll family.
We'll have to officially introduce you later.
Perfect.
Yeah, and you are officially now living here. You don't know, but you are trapped in our basement. That's how it works.
That sounds about right. I think I expected that.
Yeah, when you come to the Ghouls, that's how it works. Today we're specifically talking about an episode I've been dying to talk about ever since I saw the trailer for Cam, which is a Netflix film. And so we're going to be talking about sex workers in horror. Or just sex workers in the horror of real life.
Yeah.
Representation in general.
There are not too many horror movies based around sex work, particularly ones that paint sex workers in a positive light.
Yeah. Usually it's, they're a tool, right? Or they're a victim, or just like a way to teach the protagonist a lesson. Like, look what happens.
Yep.
You're promiscuous. The world will get you. And that's my old-timey man voice.
It's very similar to just how women are treated in horror a lot of the time. So
yeah, it's like essentially you lose your value if you are not the virginal angel person.
Yeah, if you're deflowered, which is just toxic language, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm always a flower. Excuse you.
You're always a flower, or you always have a flower. Deflowered could be,
Yeah, no one can take my flower. It is here. It's powerful. And it's always blooming and blossoming. That's how I feel about it. Yeah. Language. Yeah. We invited you on because we feel like you have some insight, right? So if you want to give us a little taste, and then we'll be diving more into that, but just kind of like an overview of like interactions and your experiences in life.
Yeah, so I kind of fell into sex work a little bit. I had a rather popular Tumblr and was, getting thirst trappy with it, and it started to become more of a thing, particularly when I was introduced to the burlesque world and met a bunch of other sex workers. And to be clear, I don't necessarily group burlesque into sex work. It's, a line there, but a lot of these people had other experiences, and I started learning more about it. I, wanted to get away from the sort of horophobia feelings that I had in my youth, and just be okay with a lot of things. Like, it just opened up my world to that. So I started doing more things because it's, being a young adult, it starts to get expensive and you have to take care of things yourself. I was in college, I had a job and an internship and whatever. I still couldn't pay for nothing. So I started doing more. I basically found the ability to wield my sexuality, which was not something I had a great relationship with, but to yield it for power. And that really was helpful to me in a lot of ways. And at the beginning of it, it was like a lot of fear. I was careful about what I did. Like camming was really scary to me because that has a lot more propensity to like go wrong, depending on what you're doing. And the level of safety, the websites you're using, how much personal information you have out there. Because part of, having those, like using sex work sites is that a lot of times you're not going to get any sort of traction unless you have some sort of other social media presence that can draw people, because it's all about, self-promotion and you have to be able to find clients, and a lot of it's not necessarily built into those websites. And especially in the beginning, because it's an art, especially being a cam girl is an absolute art. It's a performance. And a lot of the other sorts of sex work, not like, save prostitution and in-person, I don't really like that word either, but in-person sex work, those things are a lot more trying than like, say, selling nudes, selling videos, doing custom video work that you can just post up. And, even being an escort versus those types of things. This is a lot of different types of sex work you can be doing, and there's different risk factors with each one.
Yeah, awesome. And we're gonna pick your brain on that because that's a lot to digest, right? And I think that's speaks a lot to kind of the lens that everyone kind of looks at sex work with, right? Is that we just kind of like, that's what watching Cam was so amazing, just because it was just like, well, I just never really understood the mechanics of that. I never really understood the depth of like the different ways in which sex work like is used, like where it is and what that means, right? Because this is a big topic, and it's covered by many things, right? So I feel like most people have like one specific version that they just know of or like accept as, and then the other stuff is just like seen as like this fringe, but that's not true. And so so we'll be diving into that and ask some more questions, and then we are going to cover Cam, which is on Netflix, as well as a docu-series that's also on Netflix. So it's cool.
Facts. We tell you facts. All the facts. Your facts. Still facts. About that spooky stuff. Yeah, spooky stuff.
So we're talking about sex work, and we already kind of got a taste of the different ways that we can see sex work, like what it looks like, the different kind of viewpoints. But just give us a little about what is sex work, essentially.
So sex work is, work for hire service, usually of a sexual nature, but it can also be of a sort of intimate or romantic nature. And based off human connections, a lot like any other customer service job, just the nature of it is different than those other jobs.
Yeah. There's also this explanation of sex work doesn't always involve things of necessarily sexual nature, that it's more to it than that, than just like people aren't just having sex. That's not what that is. There's so much more that encompasses it.
Yeah, and sometimes like as the sex worker, you're not necessarily nude. You're not necessarily doing anything innately sexual to you, and you could also be, in an escort nature where the person doesn't want a sexual or a physical relationship. And I think all of those things still fall under a sex work umbrella. It's often like the same sites, the same sex worker doing multiple different types of services based off their client. It's all really about like what the client is interested in, and what you do as a sex worker and your boundaries, and It can look like a lot of different things.
Yeah, and it's essentially under the same umbrella of having a goal I guess pleasure is the word. But I mean, that pleasure can take many forms. So you can have it just being someone to confide in. It could be, trying something new or unique that you think might be something that helps in those ways that you couldn't try with other people. It's a way to kind of connect not only to the stranger on the internet, but also to yourself. Right? Figure out yourself.
Absolutely. And, as important as it is to like dispel stereotypes about sex workers themselves, it's important to think about their clients as well, because you would be absolutely shocked if you're not, in a pretty open-minded circle of people, or it's like sex work is a stigma for you. You'd be surprised the type of clients that come through and need some sort of support or want something. They're just doing it for fun. They have like a particular interest in one specific sex worker. There's like all sorts of different ways that it takes form for the sex worker, but same thing for the client. And sometimes that client is not at all who you would expect.
Yeah. Do you find like that there's a specific client that you gravitate towards, or that maybe like sex workers find more like engaging, or is it just like, this is what I do, if someone wants this, it's getting done?
Kind of. I am a like highly empathetic person, and am willing to take on like a variety of different clientele and have. But generally I feel like I attract more submissive clients. Which isn't true for everyone as far as being a sex worker, but I think that it's different for each sex worker. Like if you're a dom, obviously your clients are going to be subs. You are not going to attract dominant men, or, somebody that just wants you to hold their hand or whatever. It's really based off what you do and honestly how you market yourself as a sex worker. And sometimes it's like, people have their own ideas of their perception of you, and either you can choose to be like, all right, I'm going to go with this because that sounds like some good money. Or you're like, no, this is definitely not for me. But maybe I have a friend that does do that. So yeah, it's all different across the board.
Yeah. And yeah, because that's kind of just like in any field, right? It's just like, I'm an expert in X, Y, and Z, right? And I can provide you the best experience for these things. But if you want something outside of this, it's like, either accept that it's not going to be like the grade A service, or let me refer you to a service that does that.
Precisely.
It's work. Everyone, it's work. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this idea of the sorry to bother you kind of aspect between like your personal self, who you are, right, and who you're walking around with when you're with your friends and your family and loved ones, versus the persona that you put online or in that place, or like what you're promoting, because those are two different people, right? We have our customer service voice where we're like, hi, sorry to bother you, this is what the podcast is, and then there's me at home that sounds totally different, right? So just tell us about like how to, like, is it easy to flip that switch, and other struggles that you might have, like, interacting with people?
So some people never get to, like, meet the sex worker that they're getting a service from. It's strictly professional. They're on that all the time. But that they still might just absolutely believe that that's their personality. And sometimes sex workers' personality is, like, online or in their work is aligned with their personality in real life, or their wants or their needs, but a lot of the time it's not. And there seems to be a disconnect sometimes with clients, because in all the sex work circles that I'm in, and every time I've had this sort of conversation, we all have like the one client that just doesn't get it, and that one client is a recurring thing generally, that we're not, like, that is a performance, or that is what we're doing because you are paying us to do. Just like put the smile on and give the person their ice cream or their beer or their sandwich or whatever you have to do as a customer service person. that's all we're doing. It's a job. So for people to conflate that with like reality is really problematic, but it happens all the time. And, you know, sometimes you have to meet people where they are. If it's like a client who's quite obviously socially inept or has some sort of disability or something that makes it harder for them to understand that those are two different things, sometimes like that can be relatively harmless, and you just like you're just gonna perform all the time, even if you have to meet them in real life. But sometimes people are just like awful about it, and in those cases there's definitely times where you have to just be like, I'm cutting this off now because you do not understand this boundary and you are not a harmless human, and there's a lot of walls you got to put in between those things because people get confused a lot about what is real and what is the service that we are providing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and kind of on that, so we're going to be talking about the film Cam from Netflix, and it's actually directed by a former cam girl, right? So I did want to dive into what a cam girl is, but also I kind of want to talk about what are the real life horrors that a sex worker might encounter, because that director has spoken on it before, and kind of what influenced this film, and you kind of see it as someone who's just like looking for something more than just like, oh, I'm getting spooked, right? There are parts of that film that make you cringe because you're like, oh yeah, I've seen that before. But just like, what is the real life horrors, and then also what is a cam girl specifically?
So cam girls do live videos generally, and sometimes it's of a sexual nature, but a lot of the times it's like on cam girl websites, and they'll do a show on their site, and sometimes it's like, you know, really accomplished cam girls have like well thought out like theatrical shows. They have all sorts of things going on, and some of those things aren't even remotely related to sex. Like I've seen people make money off just eating noodles online. There are some
who smushes their face into bread.
yeah,
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
Okay.
there's some weird ones
Smusher.
out there, but a lot of the times it's sexual in nature, and could be like related to masturbation or somebody just being a dom for whoever's on the other side of the screen, and that oftentimes it's like a chat room, and people can basically like give some sort of like a coin or a star or whatever the symbol is for money.
Yeah.
That they're basically tipping you. And, you know, the more people who are tipping you, which can be based off of your act or things you're asking and the interaction, there's a lot more interaction element to camming than there is a lot of the more like passive things like stealing news or whatever, you know.
Yeah, they get to be an active participant. Kind of like if you were going to go watch a dancer, right? Like, and you're like, dollars, and now lap dance or whatever.
Yeah,
Like,
it's like-
that, but online.
Yeah, like live streaming on Facebook, but like people have to tip you to get you to do things or whatever, and
Twitch.
yeah,
Like
it's
the game,
much like
you
Twitch.
give money while they're doing stuff in the game.
Yeah. It's like, go into that cave. And you're like, I don't want to. And they're like, here's $10. And you're like, you know what? I'd love to go in that cave.
Yeah. And so as far as fears or, you know, risks or things that are real life horrors, the most obvious ones that you can think of is like your identity being revealed, or a client like going rogue, one of your fans finding you, introducing themselves on the, you know, in public. There's like all sorts of things in that nature, or like being exposed, like somebody screenshotting your content and like sending it to your boss. Like there's those sorts of risk factors that you would get on the internet anyway. But what I find most interesting about Cam, the movie, is that it plays a lot on a whole different fear, which is, you know, having your content stolen, having your identity and taken and used, and you not being able to see any of the benefits of that, which happens all the time. We mentioned this earlier when we were talking about it, is like somebody having their content taken and then used on Pornhub or one of those other sites, and then it's like getting a ton of hits, but that person's making the money. The people who were performing in that piece did not make a cent. And that's a huge concern, you know, that happens with photos as well as videos.
Yeah, it's literally like if you were an artist, like if you're a graphic artist, and then someone steals your work.
Yeah,
Like
and
Jenner, or whatever her name is.
part of the
Shouldn't do that.
issue about sex work being criminalized is that you have no protection from any of these things. You can't be like, this is a copyright violation because you're not supposed to be doing that. So you have no claim. And it's the same thing with sex work related violence, because you were already quote unquote doing something wrong. You don't have a protection from violence or stalking or all of those things that a normal person in any situation, even remotely similar, would be able to protect themselves from.
Yeah, and I feel like this discussion is like part 2 of what our Women in Horror episode was. So we had Timmery from Sex with Timmery podcast on to talk about like how women have been represented in horror, which is like generally we have tropes that we fulfill from something like the final girl, the blonde victim, right? But it's always centered on this idea that like any promiscuous woman who's outside of the norm of like, you're virginal and chaste and like you're sweet, or you have like final girls generally have a like a name that could, what is the word for that? My name.
Gender neutral?
Yeah, like a gender neutral name. So like they're not like super effeminate. But it's just this idea that women are supposed to uphold a very specific role in society. And when they step out of that, like there has to be repercussions to keep us in line, right? Like that's why we cross our legs and why we take up less space and all those things that you learn in like Feminism 101, right? And that's like extended to sex work, right? Is like if we stigmatize just the existence of women who enjoy sex, right? Or understand that this is a commodity in and of itself, right? And that you're literally just giving someone what they want. It's not like you're enforcing your sexual nature onto someone, right?
There is a demand. Yeah. There is a demand for it.
It
so
will
obviously,
always be
yeah, that's why there is sex work. There was always sex work. This is nothing new. We've just evolved.
Yeah, and that's why I think when we're seeing sex work on screen, that's why they're generally like a victim, or they're used as like, the motive for the protagonist who's supposed to be good, to be like, look what happens when you sleep around, right? Or God forbid you've ever had an orgasm. You're gonna get it. And so when we see sex workers in film, we're supposed to be angry with them, which is why I feel like in society, like they're stigmatized as well. And that's why we can't legalize it. That's why the people aren't like allowing them to have protection and like, let's make sure everyone has to get like checked, like and get like health insurance so we can make sure everyone's protected. Like ensure that, and then also protect, sex workers so that they aren't essentially like kind of getting into like the human trafficking scenarios that they get into, because it's just how life happens sometimes, right?
And it's really frustrating actually that like part of sex work stigma is like what ends up leading into issues with human trafficking, because they get conflated all the time in things like legal battles like SESTA, FOSTA, and all of that. It gets lumped in there. They try to just like say sex work is human trafficking so that they can put legal restrictions on it that are even worse and make it more dangerous for sex workers and make them more likely to end up in bad situations because they can't have autonomy over their own work. And they like need, an extra level of, I guess like a middleman. Those sorts of things lead to that. So it doesn't make a ton of sense that they are lumped in together in these legal things. And it really is just like an act of aggression towards sex work. Because it is not the same thing. It is nowhere near the same thing.
No. And it's just like such a unique world that has been just kind of swept under the rug. And because of that, we can then not, address the concerns and the problems that are in that society and be like, hey, we need these things and we cannot get these things if we're pretending that the bulk of it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've ended up having conversations with people about sex work who clearly like had absorbed all of what they've heard that stigmatized it and all the taboos, and their idea of it was not connected to the experience of being a sex worker or even being a client in any way. And I had those conversations with people, and they're absolutely like mind blown. They're like, oh, but you're so normal. Like, you have a real job. Like, you went to college. You're like, I can't believe that this is a thing, or I can't believe that other people pay for these things. And because it's such a wealth of experience surrounding those sorts of things, that other people absolutely have no grasp of. They have nothing to even go off of. So they just like have whatever a movie showed them, their one friend said, and the news, and people's mind are really open, especially like empathetic people. Not that any of these people I know well enough to be able to tell if they'd be particularly empathetic about anything, but I've managed to like create empathy surrounding sex work with a lot of people that seem unexpected, or they really didn't expect it even from themselves. They're like, oh, this really changes my perspective. And that's pretty important and a good reason why things like CAM should exist, because it shows the like a version of the reality of what it is like, and it's like, this is just another person doing a job and making money just like you.
Yeah, definitely that, like, seeing this as a person, a human, and not an object, right? Like, I personally in life recently actually had this conversation with someone who was talking about sex workers, and one of them remarked and was just like, yeah, and it turned out she was a ski instructor. And I was like, yeah, why are you so
people?
What do you mean? He was just like, yeah. I was like, yeah, some of them could be the nurse down. Like, what do you mean?
Well, I think there's unfortunately, because of the way that it's painted in media and society, is that people think they're in those positions because they've done something, or they need to because life has done them wrong, or they're not seeing that it can be for power, or to make yourself feel good about yourself, and that these are normal people doing a thing, doing a job.
Sometimes it's just a convenient side gig.
Yeah, and then it's I think because of all this, not to say human trafficking is not exists, it's that's a huge problem, but that's not the only way that sex work exists, and that people can do it because they want to, and not because something awful has happened to them and they have found themselves in this position.
Yeah,
it's just the assumption that
I have friends that will go back, and forth between being a stripper and then a teaching job, or it just people have all these assumptions. Some of us just do a lot of different things, and this is just one aspect of us, and that does not define us as people in any way. If you're good at something, there's nothing wrong with doing it to make money.
yeah, you're not hurting anybody. So yeah, and I think that's kind of where a lot of the horror comes from, right? Is just essentially that they're not allowed to exist, but they do. So that's where we're getting some issues. Yeah, Kat, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the common horrors that we see?
Yeah, I'll say words.
Yeah,
I was quiet
your turn.
For a while. I was just listening. You had so many good things to say.
I know,
it's
great. This is so awesome.
But yeah, a lot of the horrors from it just come from the fact that people don't have a full understanding of what it can be, and that it can be just normal people doing a thing. But then also that because it's so hidden and technically for some versions of it illegal, that when you go to seek help when bad things do happen, that the people who are supposed to help keep you safe either put you in more harm, or take advantage of the fact that they know you're doing something that under the law is illegal. And then you have just real disgusting and upsetting things happen, where police officers, we saw in the movie Cam, basically, did they assault her? I don't know.
They did
verbally
assault her. Yeah,
assaulted
it was
her.
more of that idea of you do this for a living, so you can't be taken advantage of. So it's kind of the rule of your husband can't technically rape you, like we're not allowed to say no anymore once we're married to someone. Like that was the idea. Like if you're doing this, you're selling it, then at any point if you say no, or if at any point something is happening to you, you've given up your right to like just be able to say no or just be like, no, I'm a person. Yeah.
And all of them know that when they go into a bar and they're belligerent, nobody has to serve them anything. So they should be able to understand pretty easily that we don't have to serve you anything either as sex workers just because this is our job. That is not how that works.
Well, also, at a job, you go home.
Yeah,
It's not forever. It's not just like you are it all the time. That's not what happens. You have a job, you go to the job. When the job's done, you say, all right, and you stroll on home, and then you're just who you are again. Like, it's very ridiculous. Because it's not, the perception is just not that you're people.
Yeah.
Sex workers are people. Like, the fact that you could have another job or turn off from that time isn't understood at all. It's like become something defining to who you are in the eyes of people who don't understand.
Yeah. If any, it just rips from like your autonomy, essentially. Like you revoke your personhood if you decide to do sex work. And that's inaccurate.
And it just comes from the whole, I don't know, it's not exclusively religious, but like misogynistic thing that women's value is defined by how chaste they are. Mm-hmm. If they do anything that is independent and to themselves, that is like makes them worthless. Mm-hmm. It's like you have the girl who sleeps around in high school and everyone's like, oh, that girl, she's sleeping around and it's in high school. she's not worth marrying. And it's like, the cow milk thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, no. I am a person, and I would like to exist. And if I want to have sex with a bunch of people, that's my business.
They want to have sex with me too, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't, like, make me any less cool. Yeah. Make me any less of a person.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah, virginity is a social construct. It does not exist for men, right? It's literally just here to put value on women and
if you want to hear more about that, Tim Maurice has a lot of great stuff on that.
She went on a whole tirade. It was beautiful. So definitely, if you haven't checked out our Women in Horror episode, definitely do. That's like the precursor to this one, right? Because this is further in that. But not to say that there's not men who are sex workers as well, right? Or non-gender, like anyone is doing.
Person can be a sex worker. Real horrors that we've seen just like historically. Where we have specifically June 2016 in Oakland, California, was the police department investigation where there was a long history of rape of sex workers after they like would go to report. Mm. And unfortunately, because of the fact that like it was seen as illegal, that like they just saw like I can take advantage of this.
Mm-hmm. They're already vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Because of the fact that like the protections aren't there, and then to further do that to people, the United States, as they do, criminalized sex work, but specifically tried to like make laws that would make it not as safe for sex workers to do their jobs in safe ways. So specifically 2018, the Senate's Stop Enabling Sex Trafficking Act and the House's Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act basically were just euphemisms, words, that just made it less safe. Isn't that how Tumblr became privatized too? Where they're just like, no sex on here no more.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And those things are especially damaging because, you know, on top of the fact that people use like different sites as their way to screen clients for safety, it makes it harder for like people who are coming into sex work or new sex workers or people who want to even explore that to access it and to access information about it, which, you know, like I, for example, was really lucky that I like kind of fell into a network of sex workers, so I had a wealth of knowledge that was like personal. But a lot of people don't have that, and I'll meet some people sometimes who are like, oh my god, like you did this thing, because I'll post one thing to my Instagram story that like vaguely talks about me being a sex worker, and they're like, oh my god, can we talk about this, because like I'm looking to get into it, and I like need somebody to give me advice, or like I tried this thing and it went really wrong. And, you know, people have all these blocks to being able to access information about it and do things safely, or even have someone else to talk to about it. And all of those things are just like what creates a danger. Because, for example, something that some of my friends do is if they're having an in-person client, their client doesn't know this necessarily, but they'll have like the bud, the homie behind the next door being able to be there to like make sure nothing terrible happens, you know? Or they have their friend like standing right outside the door and they know exactly what time they're supposed to be in there for. Like, there's things that we've done as a community to make each other safer, and that can only really happen if we're able to have the conversation about it. Because if you don't feel comfortable telling anybody about it, how are you going to have somebody able to watch your back in those situations? And it's like partially that, partially the education issue.
Yeah, I mean, if you think abstinence education, it's not teaching about it just makes it happen less safely. So you have people who don't know the right way to do it or the protective way to do it, and then they're still going to do it, but it's not going to be safe. You're going to get situations where you are going places and the person there is not someone you should be alone in a room with, and you could get hurt, or you don't know the safest way to like get the job done, and people hack your stuff and find you. And, you know, if you don't have the knowledge of how to do it safely, and that stuff happens.
It's on the side of the customer as well, or the client as well, because some people really don't have any idea how to look for what they're looking for, and the harder it is for them to find, the like more likely they are to have like misunderstandings about it and not be able to like be safe themselves or respect the sex worker because they came from a place where they had no information and they can't find it and they can't access people as safely as they wanted to. It's just all of those barriers are problematic in all ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of like what you were saying, like the meaning behind some of the criminalization here was just this hope that it would then help like eradicate sexually transmitted diseases somehow. Like now sex work, because it's criminalized, it doesn't exist. The same thing with abstinence, right? It's like, well, we don't teach kids about like protection, so then they are not having sex, of course. And it's like, yes, they are, but now there's higher teen pregnancy, or there's like, you know, higher STDs and stuff. So it's like the lack of information actually further like hurts this. But then there's also this idea of like, if it wasn't criminalized, right, and we can go and find sex work almost like any other exchange of services, right, there would be, like you were saying, there's protection for the client as well. It would feel more natural and regular, and it wouldn't seem shady. Like you wouldn't already start with like, I'm weird because I'm doing this. It's just like, oh, I have this thing I want to do. Let me just look it on up. Let me just search and find the database where everyone's protected and all my stuff is all good. And then I could do that, and I can explore my sexuality, and I can figure it out, and I can do it in a contained and safe environment where I feel protected. And it's not like hush hush and we're like, do you do this thing?
Well, it's also like, I feel like people just always assume you're going right to like, something is going inside of somebody. Like, they think sex is always what's happening. You're going on an escort situation. They're like, yeah, and then you have sex at the end. That's like, no. Sex work is not just sex. It's mistitled. It should be called something else, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just because it's not all under the same umbrella. Or, like, it is, but it isn't. You know, as you said, like, it's about... what was the word? We used a word.
I said pleasure before, but I mean
pleasure,
even regardless,
connection, intimacy.
Yeah.
It's just a unique custom service sometimes.
Yeah, and regardless of it, if it actually includes sex, right? It's just like, if we're all on the same page and we're all clear and we're doing this and we're protecting each other, then what's the problem? Yeah. We're all adults.
Yeah, I've had some clients that, you know, like I met them in a sex work context, but like really the things that they wanted had absolutely nothing to do with sex. Like, some of them were just like bizarre conversations, living out fantasies that don't have anything to do with sex. You know, there's all sorts of things out there, and what people imagine, obviously, is like what, like you said, is just like they kind of jump directly into like prostitute. It's like no. That's
Like there are layers. There are other
Yeah,
things.
so
that
many
happen.
layers.
And then I feel like it also just gets looped into this idea that no matter what, it is not by choice.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a
That
big
like
stigma.
they loop into the trafficking end where it's like there are definitely tons of people being kidnapped and forced into things that are awful and just like no one should be. The power part is the important part for the person performing the sex work.
Yeah.
If that's taken away, that's the problem, not the fact that it exists online or that people can access it safely. If anything, that's how it should be, so that you have less of the situations where people are where the power's being taken away, where your stuff's getting posted on Pornhub, but that was stuff you did and we're getting money for. And it's taking away your ownership over it.
Mm-hmm. It's the autonomy of it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Awesome.
Films. Yeah, films. Yeah, films. We watch some films. Now let's talk about those films. And all that spooky stuff. And all that spooky stuff.
Include
special now.
Yeah, so we watched some stuff. We've mentioned some tidbits of it to you, but if you are unfamiliar, we watched Cam, which is from 2018. It is a Netflix film. It is directed by Daniel Goldhaber and written by Issa Mazay. I hope I'm saying your name right. I'm really sorry. Mazay.
I think you said it right. It sounds right.
And this is what it's about. So Alice, an ambitious cam girl, wakes up one day to discover she's been replaced on her show with an exact replica of herself. Right, so it essentially is Alice, who is a cam girl. Alice is her real name. Her cam girl persona is Lola_Lola. And she is really good. Like, it was very entertaining. She's got like this beautifully pink room, and she's got all these setups, and she puts on these really elaborate and beautiful shows, and just like also like kind of like very specific niche shows. Like she has some violent ones that were like crazy to set us up with, and then it was all a part of the game, and then she finds that someone is an imposter and is pretending to be her, looks just like her, and is making all her money. And she's locked out of her account. There's no way to verify her account. If anyone has been locked out of your Instagram, it's like minorly like a representation of that. I've been locked out of my account, and it was just like my account became butts and it wasn't my butt, and I was like, this isn't fair. And I'm just being like, Instagram help. And I was able to get in, but even that, it was a horror story of just being like, this is my brand, my personal brand. And and that's nothing. That was like I wasn't making money off of my personal brand. I could later, but like imagine that plus like this is your financial livelihood. But what is really cool about Cam unique in regards to horror films specifically about sex workers is that she's very personified. She's a person. We see her connection with her brother, and he like teases her about her work. We see eventually when she, spoilers, like talks to her mother about it and how stressful that it, like her whole family essentially finding out, right? And that was like traumatizing in and of itself. Her interactions with police officers when she tries to get help is very like relatable to what Kat was talking about in the fact section, where you're already seemed and deemed as nothing. You've given up your rights essentially. So why should we care? And we're just going to continue to like put you down and not get you the help. So it is written by a former cam girl, so it was a lot of these experiences that we're seeing are not exactly directly her life, but lives of people she knows or stories that she's heard and in that circle of people. And so it's very authentic, and it's refreshing to see like this human dealing with a very human issue, and it just so happens that her job is sex work. Like this could, like you could have put this on. I think when we were talking about it, we were like,
because we were doing influencers and stuff like that. Was what we were talking about. We kind of see on like YouTube and Instagram.
Yeah.
Influencers are just like people who are putting on a show online for money. That isn't necessarily sex work, but operates kind of in a similar fashion.
Yeah, when you are your brand, right? Like
Yeah.
your face and who you're putting out there is a brand. So it's just I think we were talking about like Twitch or cosplayers on Instagram or something, right? Like you're just this persona, and if you were on Twitch and then all of a sudden someone took your account and then was being your Twitch, like you lost your finances. Like you could literally take this film and then put it on any of those things, and then other people would be like, oh cool, I relate to this. But the second you put like sex work in it, it makes it different, because we don't ever get to hear this story, and to have it be like treated this way was just honestly beautiful. Like I really, really enjoyed it. It was refreshing and just different.
It's definitely the black mirror. Sorry, it's definitely like the black mirror of camming and sex work, because it pulls on that like same fear that every person has about the internet and social media and digital media and all of that, and it just like it's just a little bit more specific by a hair.
Yeah, and it's just refreshing to have someone tell a story that is from them, where they're telling the story of someone's experience, but they're not being like, well, this is what I think it would be, and then just like making up a bunch of stuff, which I feel like you get in the more, taboo's not the right word, is it? Where it's like things are not understood. What does taboo mean?
Taboo would be like outside the realm of normalcy, or what is perceived as normalcy.
Stigmatized.
Yeah. So like, when men tell a story about a woman who was raped, and it's like, no. This isn't your story to tell. It's nice when it's actually someone who's experienced these things telling the story.
Or someone who can relate
Yeah.
on a more emotional level than just being like, I heard that this is hard. I heard that being a lady is real difficult. And it's like, oh, really? Did you hear that? Guess who's living that? All of us. Like, don't take our words. But that's exactly kind of like I think what's so interesting. So we've covered like imposters before, and we've also talked about loss of individuality in film. But I think what's so interesting about this is like that there's just, man, I don't even know how to put it into words. It's just like really unique to see this direct tie to the person that you put out there and your job and your brand versus the person that you are, and how they can be separate, and they are usually separate, right? And that people have a hard time separating them and differentiating them. And it does that in such a great way. Like I don't even know what words to say. Well, the writer herself has said a lot of great things. She has been quoted to say that the point of this story was to tell a story where the audience would identify with someone who does what I used to do. Before we even knew it would be a genre film, we knew we wanted to make a movie that viewed sex workers in a sympathetic light and destigmatized sex work. And it did. It achieved that.
And what's funny is like, to all the people that I, know who are sex workers, who I've talked to about the film, it's like, everybody likes it, which is like generally, when there's something that comes out and it's not from the perspective of the right person, it just comes off as disingenuous and it doesn't connect. But this movie connects because the person had a background in that. And it makes me think of like, I don't know, a little while ago watching some movie where they show a train hopping scene, and my friend who train hops was sitting with me and was like, oh God, that's like so not how that is. And I thought it was super funny at the time, but I was like, yeah, that's, something you wouldn't think of. The writer clearly had zero experience with this, but was like, but I'm going to write this scene in here. And it makes a huge difference. Even like the scene was 2 seconds long, but it made a huge difference. Just the fact that it's like, it's clearly that person had no experience. Whereas this film comes from somebody with that experience. So it connects to the people who actually have had that experience as well. It doesn't come off as like you were saying, a guy writing about a woman's experience that just he's never had. So that it's a huge layer there that makes it work.
Yeah, and like talking about representation, like we see, specifically, we talk about horror noir a lot recently. And it was like when a white man was trying to tell the black experience and how that was so problematic because black audiences were like, this is not, this isn't right. And it's not their story to tell, even if it might be interesting. So, yeah, that's cool. I liked Camelot.
It's just like overarching is like this idea, right, of representation, and that's what we're going to be covering in this series, right? Is like to be a lot of the time, right, in our modern life, there are times when we are not seeing certain populaces and certain identities or certain people. And sometimes our only understanding or representation or whatever is through a screen, right? So if for years and years and centuries, whatever, we are only seeing one interpretation of sex workers, and that is victims, that is like people who aren't worth like love and attention or are less than people and should be abused, and we shouldn't, like, there's no wonder that we then live in a society where that's exactly what people think of them in real life, right? And it's the same thing what you're seeing in like horror noir, which is a documentary on Shudder that talks about African American representation in film. It's like this idea of like, if, you know, people overseas who don't have a large black populace only see the movies we put out, then they have this interpretation of what black people were. And it was a very toxic, terrible interpretation. They're like, oh, you guys are all just thugs and gangsters. And it's like, no, like, that is not at all what this is. So to have something like Cam, where it's just like, here's a friendly reminder that this is a person and that they have these experiences, and that, you know, it kind of just like turns it on its head. And it's just like, to see it, it makes you all of a sudden go like, wait, oh my gosh, I've never really gotten to see this before. And that was what was really cool to me. It was just like, why did it take till 2018?
Yeah. In college, I took a screenwriting course, and I'll never forget, my teacher told me, write what you know, because that is how you get a real story, because you can actually convey the story from your perspective if you had that experience. And I'll never forget the first screenplay. It was like a short thing that I had to write for the class. You know, it was like, he was like, write one scene. And when we turned them all in, he just had read them all, and he picked mine to read to the class because he thought it was really good. And I was like, oh no, because I'd written about something that actually had happened. And, you know, like, I obviously cut some parts out, but it was literally, the scene was just me driving in a car with my ex, who was a junkie, who was basically like going through withdrawal, and we're having a whole argument about it because we're driving to my family's house in Florida. And I wrote about that interaction, you know, like in screenplay format, basically. And he had made us like read it aloud and play it out in the class. And I was like, oh no, but also he was right. Like, I wrote what I knew, so it came off, you know, like I really could get behind the characters and what was happening, because that had really happened. And that's just a very important lesson that all like directly relates to why this movie works, and why, you know, now it's like becoming a whole thing that people are writing about the things that they're experiencing, rather than some white guy writing about everybody else's experience.
Scarlett.
Yeah, and like, thank God that that's happening. Oh my God, Scarlett. And it's also interesting. I remember we were watching the trailer. I like didn't notice this before, but it's like from the same, like, not creators, but Blumhouse, who did Get Out, and, you know, they're doing a real good job at making sure representation is accurately portrayed instead of,
I will say
inaccurate.
They're doing a better job.
They used to do bad.
They could do even better.
Well, there you go. I just thought it was interesting that it came from like the same house as Get Out, and I was like, how that was also like a really good representation.
I just don't want them to get off on thinking they did it and they're good, because they're not.
Oh, no.
Because the the, owner of Blumhouse was recorded saying that, you know, the movie was so good that they didn't have to do anything. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's good. Because the owner of Blumhouse was recorded saying that, you know, the movie was so good that they didn't have to do anything. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's good. they don't hire female directors for their horror films because just women don't want to do horror films.
Oh my god.
And it was like,
yikes.
are
All right,
you,
never mind.
have you met a woman?
Rescind my endorsement.
No, but it is like, the thing is that in now modern day, right, is that we are pushing for representation, right? And that it's unfortunate that it's taken this long, but it's also like, it's good that it's happening, right?
Yeah.
And it's important that it's happening.
Kudos
and,
where they're due.
Yes,
but
like-
not too many kudos.
Yes, you get one kudo, and then you can earn the rest later. But yeah, it's just this idea of like, we want to see ourselves on screen because a man ought to see himself. That's the quote from Horror Noir,
Yeah.
from Blackula, where he's just like, hey, right, man ought to see himself, because you don't have a reflection, which is one of my favorite Junot Diaz quotes, but I'll get into that in a later episode because I'll talk about Junot Diaz. But yeah, we also watched another thing that we'll just recap pretty quickly, but we watched a docu-series that's also on Netflix called Hot Girls Wanted, Turned On, and we watched one episode specifically, which was the 5th episode of the series called Take Me Private, which features Alice Frost, who's a 25-year-old woman living in LA who makes her living as a cam girl performing for fans who pay her different rates, and she goes and visits one of her clients. And so what I thought was really interesting about this, besides the fact they're both named Alice, was there was this... she goes to visit this person who she's been talking to for a very long time, and he's been a constant contributor to her page. She talked to him like pretty much daily, right? And she was always like his therapeutic person. Like he would tell her about his day, and he bought all her things, and like even her boyfriend was like, I understand this guy is like doing something, and like so when she decided to go to see him, it was a big deal. It was a lot of stress for her boyfriend, but also it was like, I don't think she was really expecting what she was going to get. And when she got there, she was almost immediately uncomfortable. And not because like this guy was a creep, because she didn't feel that. It was more that she felt a lot of things, and she was even like caught crying at one point because she was essentially sad because she was not the person that he was expecting, that he had put more weight on their relationship and had clearly put his own life on hold was essentially using her as an excuse not to propel his own life forward, right? She was just like, she was his therapist in his relationship without being an actual relationship, so he therefore did not have to try other things, like getting actual therapy or finding actual meaningful relationships, and was missing ones that were right there in front of him. In fact, they show like a girl who has a crush on him. But he was super sweet, and she definitely like wasn't like, this guy's a weirdo. She was just like, I feel really bad that like I've done all like that. I've been a part of this guy's life for like 5 years and didn't know how strong that connection was. And it was just that idea of like not being able to detach like from the client's point of view, the woman from her work, like her cam girl from Alice, and like her kind of coming to terms with that people aren't always going to be able to do that.
I think it was like the biggest thing was him not being able to understand that she would be different in person, that like what she was doing was a persona. It was part of her job. And that like he was seeing it more as a strong emotional connection, like a girlfriend, even though that was not what they were doing.
You're paying me.
Yeah. And just like the disconnect of understanding it's a fee for service.
Yeah.
You know, and like, you know, she did care about him, but that it was, you can't be your work voice all the time.
Yeah, you
and that
can't
like,
always
it's
be
just
on.
like very emotionally draining if you can't ever be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that like, clearly if you can't be yourself around someone, that's not someone you should be more emotionally involved with.
Yeah, if they can't see you. Yeah,
Not
as
a
a
man.
sex worker and as a woman, like you do not owe anyone anything. You have every right to say no at any point in time, anything.
Your customer service voice is not forever.
Yeah, or even in any instance when something becomes a no, it's a no. And
Yeah.
I think we just need to keep drilling that home. We had our whole series on rape culture and all of that. So, yeah, it's one of our favorite subjects because it's such a problem that we want to fix.
Feelings. Yeah, feelings. Yeah, I said feelings. Let's talk about feelings. Okay. And all that spooky stuff. I love spooky stuff.
So if you like it, it's don't forget to tip your sex worker. Hey, we'll be here all week. And then if you don't like it, it is sorry to bother you in your best sorry to bother you customer service voice. So I'll put this out for you guys. So for the topic of sex work, I'll just say that. Yeah, sex work. The existence of sex work. What is your rating?
Ooh, that's spicy.
you yay or nay, sex work?
Are you asking
Yeah,
us?
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Of course you tip your sex worker.
Yeah, you have to tip your sex worker.
Tip her, tip them, tip him. Do it. Just do
Yeah.
it.
All of them.
Throw the money.
Yeah.
Learn about it.
Yeah.
Go outside and read or talk to somebody. Or maybe
Yeah.
your friend is a sex worker and they just don't feel comfortable letting you know about it.
Because
Make yourself approachable and, don't say rude things about sex workers or slut shame or anything of that nature, because that's probably when your sex worker friend that you don't know about yet is like, mental note.
can't tell that
Definitely
person.
not telling that person. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how about mine is also tip your sex workers. How about the topic of the representation, right? Or not representation. Maybe just like the way that sex workers are treated in society currently.
Well, it's bad.
Yeah, not good. Not
So
good.
sorry to bother you.
Sorry to
I don't think anyone would be like, it's great. When, like, even in not sex work contexts, women aren't treated okay.
Yeah.
It's just a bad time across the board, but extra
Yeah.
in this
And
context.
that's your job. Okay, then for the mediums that we watched, so we watched Cam and the docu-series, I've already forgotten what it was.
Hot Girls Wanted, wasn't
Hot
it?
Girls Wanted, turned on.
There
Because
you
that's
go.
what you do, you turn on devices, and then it's on now. And then also, it means because you're aroused.
I'm for it. It was fun. It was a good time. And it was just like, I respect it. I was like, thank God somebody made something that wasn't upsetting.
Yeah,
And it was like, good,
yeah.
positive.
Yeah.
Cool.
Humanizing.
Humanizing,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I thought it was good to kind of have this dichotomy of like a fictional work matched with a documentary, because they both treated the subject really respectfully, right? So in Cam, it was obviously like she's the protagonist. We got to see her journey and kind of like walk through her shoes and some of the challenges, right? But then also the docu-series was really interesting. And we watched a few episodes. So there's other ones that aren't specific to Cam Girls. So it does like it spans all of them. There's other Cam Girl documentaries, so you can hear about like how they get involved. And a lot of it is really eye-opening because you're just like, no, these women are not being sex trafficked, right? A lot of these people are doing this by choice, and it is empowering and it is autonomous for them, right? They're making the decisions. They select their clients. They're the ones who are getting the money. They're doing it because they love it, and it makes good money sometimes. And it's also like competitive, and that's kind of fun, right? So I want more. I would think we should have more films like Cam, and we should have more documentaries. And I'm totally down to watch all of them.
And I just think it's good because then if there were more of them, then we'd have less witnessing of conversations where sex workers are brought up and as if they're objects and not people.
And they're not like, oh, they were a ski instructor. You're like, yeah. You would just be like, oh, yeah, so my friend is a sex worker and a ski instructor. So I can go to them for several different items. There's two options now.
I was at a conference that is entirely unrelated to sex work. It was actually a professional conference for my day job, and they had a whole track related to sex workers, and I went to one of the sessions, and it was like a room full of people that would have probably never ended up in the same room, even knowing that we were all sex workers for the most part, or people who are just like trying to get a better understanding and be better advocates for it. It's like there's a whole lot of different things out there, and the more conversation we have, like that was like such an enlightening experience. And I already have tons of people that I get to talk to where I live that are my friends, but the more that we're able to talk to each other, like, and connect across different places, etc., about it, the better understanding everybody's going to have about all of the aspects of it.
Yeah, awesome. Yes, that's beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Leia, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's been super helpful and interesting. Yeah, just thank you. I don't even know what else to say because I was just like, wow, this is great. I'm so glad.
I was excited you even watched the movie when you told me you watched it. I was like, oh my God, me too. It's so cool. Like, on a completely unrelated to the fact that I've ever done sex work thing, it's like, did you watch that movie on Netflix? It's just like every other thing, but I was stoked.
I want everyone to watch it. This is definitely a 10 out of 10. Like, go see it. It's like, it's got some flaws and some issues in some parts of the story, and there's like a part in the middle I felt like it was a little dull, but a lot of it was very impactful and it was suspenseful. There's lots of gore, there's lots of blood that's happening, which is also really fun for us thriller people.
It's very twisty. It's very fast paced in the sort of way that it just keeps you on the edge of your seat, like, I'm gonna freak out.
Well, she needs her identity. It's been stolen.
It's very similar to watching an episode of Black Mirror where you're like, oh my God, that could really happen to me. Oh my God, oh my God. Even if you're not a sex worker, you still get that feeling in the movie, so.
Yeah, no, for sure.
If you guys do have any further questions, feel free to shoot us an email over at theghouls@gmail.com, and we can get some answers to you from Leia, or even if you're just like, hey, that jogged my memory about the women in horror, so let me ask some questions to Timmery, or if you're just like, do you have any other friends who might know this, the X, Y, and Z? We live in a great area where there's a lot of there's a lot of people. They do a lot of things. We're very, I would say, connected to different types, and
we're like, we have such cool friends.
Yeah,
basically, yeah. Like, we're all super connected, and like the communication lines are open between all of us. So any questions that come into the ghouls next door can easily be funneled to where they need to. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. First and foremost. So thank you, Leia, and don't get married.
They'll eat your kids.
Goodbye.